Thank you, Michael. I'd also like to thank the JCRC of Greater Washington and their Executive Director, Ron Halber, for their tremendous support on efforts of my family's behalf. Nearly 2 years ago, on the night of December 3rd, 2009, the Shabbat table was set. In a half an hour, Alan would be walking through the door, putting on his kippah and saying the motzi. When a half hour passed, I thought his flight must be delayed. I checked, and I was a bit startled to find out that his flight had landed. I began to have a sinking feeling. After a few phone calls, I learned that Alan had not made it onto the flight. I then knew that something was terribly wrong. I later learned that night that Alan was arrested, charges unknown, and that he was in a maximum security prison in Havana, Cuba. This was the beginning of almost 2 years of incredible suffering for Alan, our family, and our friends. Most of you don't know Alan, so I'd like to say a few words about him. Above all, he is a humanitarian. He has devoted his life to helping others. He's worked in over 50 countries, primarily emerging markets, with one goal: to improve the quality of life for the disadvantaged. Alan is also passionate about the Jewish community, both here and abroad. He worked for B'nai B'rith Youth Organization in DC, and he worked for the Washington Federation for many years also. He's very active in our congregation and other communities. It's the combination of these qualities that brought Alan to the Jewish community in Cuba. He wanted to do what he always does: help his fellow Jews. The Jewish community in Cuba is small but very spread out, and it's difficult for them to communicate with one another and with the rest of the world. Alan jumped at the chance to be able to help them improve their ability to communicate with one another and to share. He was helping them to have better access with the internet so they could download prayer books and see pictures of the outside world. He helped them to create an intranet so the communities could be closer together to share things like recipes, sports scores, everyday things. This is what he was doing in Cuba, nothing more. Believe it or not, one of the most touching aspects of his work in Cuba came through during Alan's trial in Havana. The government called several witnesses from the Jewish community to testify about Alan. I'll never forget one man's testimony. He was an older gentleman and very frail. He had trouble getting up to the witness stand. When the prosecutor asked him what Alan had shown him on the intranet, he became very emotional and exclaimed, "I saw the world. I saw the Western Wall." This was the first time that this man had ever been introduced to anything like that. Because of this humanitarian work, Alan is sitting in a jail cell today. That Alan has been convicted of crimes against the state of Cuba, and that he has been sentenced to 15 years in prison for helping the Jewish community to share prayers and to look at pictures of Jerusalem, is beyond any sense of reason. It's inhumane and it's unjust. Alan's only intention was to help the small communities in Cuba, nothing more. I know that Cuban authorities know this. They were at the same trial that I was. They heard the same testimony that I heard. You may know about the health challenges we have faced in our family. since Alan has been imprisoned. Both my daughters are suffering terribly, fearing that they might not ever see their father again. My oldest daughter went through cancer surgery without her father by her side. Alan's mother, 89, is also fighting cancer. She's mourning the fact that she may never see her son again. And of course, there is Alan. He has lost more than 100 pounds. He's not well. He's suffering every day, mentally, physically, and spiritually. Alan and we are desperate for him to return home. We are working together to declare Thursday, December 1st, Alan Gross Day across the country. On the eve of his 2-year anniversary of arrest of incarceration, we want our community, our country, and the world to know that Alan Gross needs to be released from Cuba. We ask you to please join us in this effort. Contact your members of Congress. Tell them to take action on behalf of Alan. Tell everyone you know about Alan. Write letters to your newspaper. Let the Cuban government know that Alan needs to come home. On behalf of Alan and our family, thank you for your concern and your anticipated help.